It's February 1872 in Cleveland, Ohio. A horse-drawn carriage crunches on the snow as it heads down Euclid Avenue. The street is also known as Millionaire's Row, and right now the carriage stops in front of a massive black iron gate. Isaac L. Hewitt steps down from the carriage. His breath rises in small clouds as he puts his gloves on and surveys the two-story mansion in front of him. The house belongs to John D. Rockefeller. When Rockefeller was 16, Hewitt hired the boy to be a bookkeeper. It's been years since that day, and Rockefeller has clearly made his way up in the world. Hewitt looks to his carriage driver and tells him to wait. He then walks through the iron gate and starts down the long driveway. The winter air is crisp and biting, and he's keen to get in from the cold. Still, he's anxious about entering this house and this meeting. Rockefeller has become someone far different from the quiet boy Hewitt once knew. Rockefeller's firm, Standard Oil, is now the largest oil refiner in Cleveland and possibly the world. The company is growing more powerful by the day. Hewitt owns an oil refinery too, but with Standard Oil continuing to dominate the market, Hewitt may soon be run out of business. That's why he's here today, to ask a favor from his old employee, John D. Rockefeller. Hewitt reaches the mansion's large oak door and raps the brass handle. The maid, dressed in black, answers. She says she'll fetch Mr. Rockefeller. A moment later, Rockefeller appears at the door. He's dressed in a brown riding jacket and shoots Hewitt a surprised look. Mr. Hewitt, what brings you to my home? John, there's something I'd like to discuss, a business matter. May I come in? Well, actually, I was about to go riding. Why don't we go for a walk and discuss it? I could use some fresh air. More than anything, Hewitt wants to sit in a warm room by a crackling warm fire, but he's not in a position to argue, not yet. So he nods his head, and the two slowly walk along a snowy path. Well, John, I'll come right out with it. I've heard a rumor. People say that Standard Oil has an agreement with the railroads. People say you're in control. You're dictating the rates that the rest of us have to pay if we want to ship oil. Well, you've heard correctly. What of it? Everyone's scared, John. They say you'll be the only refiner who can ship kerosene and still make a profit. And if that's the case? Hewitt's face grows flushed. He tries to contain his anger. Well, if that's the case, then we're finished. All of us out of business. It'll be too expensive to ship our kerosene. Please, John, please step back. Don't do this. Play fair. Rockefeller stares into the distance, cold look in his eyes. There's that word, fairness. The economists talk about the importance of competition. That's nonsense. Competition starves business. Isaac, I have a different proposition. I'll buy your refinery, and it won't just be you. I'll buy all the refineries in Cleveland. Then no one will be run out of business. We'll all be united. What you're talking about isn't unity. It's you controlling everything. No, it's simply weeding out smaller, less efficient businesses that drag down the entire industry. You can choose to wait, keep fighting, then go bankrupt in a year or two. I'm giving you a chance to join us right now. Hewitt clenches his jaw and shakes his head. That's hardly a choice. A moment later, the two reach the front of the driveway. Hewitt steps through the gate out onto Euclid Avenue. He waits for Rockefeller to follow. Instead, Hewitt's former employee remains inside the gate. Mr. Hewitt, there's nothing else to discuss. With your permission, I'll have someone come by to examine your books and make an offer. I hope you'll consider it. It will be your salvation. Now, goodbye. With that, Rockefeller shuts the iron gate and returns to his house. Hewitt stands alone out in the cold winter air. A flush of anger is rising through him. Hewitt won't stand for this. He'll refuse to sell, and he'll hold out as long as possible. Yet deep down, Hewitt knows that Rockefeller is right. With the railroads in his pocket, soon Rockefeller could take over every refinery in Cleveland. Hewitt is willing to fight this battle, but he's not sure that he'll win the war. American Scandal is sponsored by the new Audible original Bad Republican by Meghan McCain. In her debut audio memoir, Meghan McCain gives a first-hand look into the life of the conservative rebel and departing co-host of The View. You'll hear what it's like to grow up as the daughter of an American icon and to mourn his loss very publicly just 1 year into her tenure as co-host of America's most-watched daytime talk show. Her memoir also reveals how she handled attacks from the U.S. president and her thoughts on cancel culture, dating, and how our country treats new mothers. It's unsparingly honest, deeply relatable, and highly entertaining. Go beyond what you know about Meghan McCain from TV and your newsfeed. Visit audible.com/badrepublican and listen now.
We get support from the new podcast, Hemingway's Picasso. Stephen Coe lived many lives. He was an NFL journeyman, a male model, and one of the most well-connected smugglers in 1980s Miami. Coe collected many souvenirs from his adventures, but his most treasured bounty, a beautiful ceramic crafted by Pablo Picasso and gifted to Ernest Hemingway at the author's Cuban home. So the story goes. Lost during the Cuban Revolution, the artwork resurfaced when Coe took it as payment for a drug run financed by the notorious Pablo Escobar. Coe passed away in 2018, passing the piece down to his son, Stevie. Stevie feels he needs to complete his father's mission of selling this piece and telling Steve's cinematic life story. Is the Picasso authentic or a fraud? Was Steve Coe a big talker or a real deal smuggler? Listen to new episodes of Hemingway's Picasso every Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
From Wondery, I'm Lindsey Graham, and this is American Scandal. At the height of the Civil War, a young businessman named John Davison Rockefeller invested in an oil refinery. Before long, he owned the entire plant. But Rockefeller had bigger plans. He wanted to dominate the entire industry. And so he founded Standard Oil, a new company that could move aggressively against its rivals. Rockefeller also formed a secret alliance with the country's powerful railroads. The deal would allow the company to ship kerosene at the lowest possible rates, an advantage that could destroy any competitor. Next, Rockefeller began to build his empire. Standard Oil used ruthless tactics to acquire its rivals, and many found their livelihood suddenly upended. But not everyone would sit still and wait for Standard Oil to seize control. Standard's tactics would build a deep desire for justice in a young woman named Ida Tarbell, a woman who would go on to become Rockefeller's most dreaded foe. This is episode 2, Going to War. It's the evening of February 27, 1872. Several thousand men are gathered in front of the Opera House in Titusville, Pennsylvania. The building is made of smooth gray bricks and evokes a sense of sophistication and culture. Yet tonight, in front of the Opera House, mobs of men shout and wave homemade banners. Inside the building, Franklin Tarbell pushes through a tightly packed crowd. He reaches the theater door and looks up at the elaborate chandeliers that hang from the ceiling. He remembers coming to a performance here with his wife soon after they moved to Titusville. At the time, Tarbell thought the Opera House was a sign of the town's respectability. He never guessed it would become the rallying point for desperate men. Just yesterday, Tarbell and the other oil men woke up to a shock. The morning paper told the story of a secret alliance between the railroads and Standard Oil out in Cleveland. This alliance was called the South Improvement Company, and it had a terrible purpose. Independent oil producers and refiners would have to pay double the shipping rate. At the same time, Standard would get steep discounts when shipping its products by railroad. Tarbell can still feel the anger tighten his chest. Standard Oil and the railroads are conspiring to take food off his family's table. They're trying to steal the money he saved for his daughter's education. With their pact, they could destroy the entire town. Inside the theater, he winds through the crowd and finds a place to stand at the end of a row. Ahead of him, men are packed shoulder to shoulder in the orchestra pit. Suddenly, someone from the balcony yells out, "Down with the conspirators!" Tarbell shouts in response, but he can barely distinguish his voice among the cries all around him. The voices are united, boiling over with rage, and Tarbell feels both pride and determination. Surely the men in this room will find a way to fight back. Soon, a man walks to the center of the empty stage. He's young, maybe in his late 20s, has a ruddy complexion and wide-set eyes. He wears a black suit over his short frame. The man calls for order, and the room slowly settles into silence. The man speaks in a strong voice, like a preacher. He says his name is John Archibald, and he's a proud oilman. He refines oil right here in Titusville. He's grateful for the chance to speak his mind, because this town means so much to him. The room remains quiet, and the young man continues, his voice growing with the heat of rage. Archibald says every man in this room is under threat from a conspiracy. Standard Oil has teamed up with the railroads. They're like an anaconda, trying to squeeze them all to death. Archibald pauses, and in that moment of silence, Franklin Tarbell calls out, "Down with the monster! Down with Standard Oil!" The crowd erupts in wild cheers. Archibald smiles in Tarbell's direction, then continues. He says that everyone in this room came to the oil regions to make their own way. Now, that freedom is under threat. But they can't bow down. They must organize a boycott. Archibald lays out his plan. He says that Titusville's oil producers must refuse to sell even one drop of crude to Standard Oil. They must cut off the supply. That way, Standard won't have the raw material to make its famous kerosene. Archibald casts a menacing glare as he issues a warning. Anyone who disagrees, anyone who keeps selling to Standard, they'll find their barrels smashed to bits. The crowd roars with approval, and someone shouts that they should tear up the rail tracks, too. Out in the audience, Franklin Tarbell nods in agreement. He knows this boycott will be painful for his business. Standard is one of the largest buyers on the market, but everything he's built is now at stake. If they don't stop Standard Oil and the railroads, he and his family could lose everything. And so he pumps his fist in the air, and once more, Tarbell shouts out. He calls for the downfall of Standard Oil, for the end of this conspiracy. More men shout out, and Tarbell joins them, bellowing until his voice grows hoarse. It's March 1872. On the main streets of Titusville, light spills out from the French windows of the Tarbell family home. Inside the house, Ida Tarbell stands in her white nightgown, her face pressed against the cold glass windows. She's 14 years old and filled with a terrible worry. There's still no sign of her father, Franklin, and the night is only getting later. Ida's mother and siblings are asleep, but she won't go to bed until she knows her father is home safely. He's been out very late these last 2 weeks. One night he came home carrying an axe. His clothes were stained black with oil. Ida asked for an explanation, but all he'd say was that he was fighting to save his business. Ida is about to turn from the window when her father comes into view. Tonight, Franklin Tarbell is dressed in his dark gray suit, as if for a meeting. He stands tall and looks proud, but his steps seem heavy. Ida rushes to the door as he pushes it open. She greets him excitedly and asks what happened tonight. Her father puts a hand on her shoulder. He says she should be asleep. She's got school tomorrow. Ida again asks about his day, but Franklin sighs, takes off his coat and sinks down into a sofa. Ida sits beside him. He smiles at her but looks weary. He says he did something today he never thought he'd do. He turned down a chance to sell oil at $4.50 a barrel. That's far above market rate, he says. But he signed a pledge to boycott Standard, and he's sticking to it. John D. Rockefeller won't get one drop of his oil. Ida senses her father's pride, but also sees the dark circles under his eyes. She doesn't know who this man Rockefeller is, but he sounds frightening and powerful. She leans forward and whispers, asking if Rockefeller is the one who wants to ruin him in Titusville. Franklin's eyes flash with a tired look of anger. Yes, he tells her, Rockefeller has teamed up with the railroads, and together they're trying to put him out of business. Ida squints, confused. Her father's a good man. Why would anyone go after him? She asks for an explanation, and Franklin sinks deeper into the sofa. He exhales, looks Ida directly in the eyes, just like he always does when he's about to deliver bad news. Franklin tells her this is all about greed. The American people gave the railroads land on the condition that they work to benefit everyone. But now the railroads are trying to back out of the deal. They want to get rid of the small businesses and their insignificant shipping orders. Instead of benefiting all the people, they only want to benefit one man, Rockefeller. Ida clenches her fists, says that's not fair, and her father pats her knee. He tells her that's exactly why he has to fight. It's not just about business. It's about principle. Rockefeller and the railroad barons are rich and powerful, so they think they should be treated differently. But Franklin says that's not American. In America, one man shouldn't stand above another. Ida shoots up from the sofa. Her thoughts are swirling. She says if she had anything to do with it, she'd make sure Rockefeller never cheated again. Her father smiles and chuckles lightly. He pats her on the shoulder and says he has no doubt about it. It's March 1872 in Cleveland, Ohio. John D. Rockefeller sits at the head of a long dining room table inside his mansion. He gazes toward the vaulted ceiling as he blesses the meal. His prayer finished, Rockefeller looks to his wife, Seti. Her face glows in the candlelight. They've just learned that she's pregnant with their third child. It's a night to celebrate, and Seti begins passing around dishes of roast chicken and French beans. Rockefeller glances across the table. His younger brother Frank is their guest this evening. Frank's wide cheeks are flushed. Rockefeller frowns. He's sure he saw Frank sneaking a sip from his flask before the meal. He already regrets inviting his brother, but it felt necessary. Their relations have been strained these past weeks, ever since Rockefeller bought the oil refinery where Frank was a partner. Tonight is a chance to clear the air. But now Frank shoots Rockefeller a bitter look. So, tell me, brother, how does it feel to be the most hated man in Cleveland? Thugs destroying my oil barrels and tearing up the railroad tracks? That only proves my point. The region needs a good, orderly company like Standard. Those so-called thugs are the men you're running out of business, in Pennsylvania and here in Cleveland. I heard about poor Mr. Hewitt. Frank turns to Seti. Are you aware that your husband fleeced the very man who gave him a job when he was 16? That he forced Hewitt to sell his refinery for less than half what it was worth? Seti quietly sets her fork down. Rockefeller stares silently and disapprovingly as his brother's eyes fill with drunken tears. And he fleeced me even worse. Now my refinery's gone and I'm out of the partnership. A lot of good people in Cleveland made an honest living from refining. Now my own brother has turned them all out on the street. Very good, brother, very Christian. Rockefeller calmly sets down his fork and addresses Frank. Everyone's been treated quite fairly, and I'm sure you'll be very happy with the dividends from your Standard Oil stock. Frank turns again to Seti. How can a good Christian woman bear the children of a monster like this? Did you read the papers? They call his handiwork the Cleveland Massacre. Seti starts to stammer a response, but Frank continues. You're so high and mighty, John. You always think you are one step ahead, but you don't understand the mess you've gotten yourself into. Men won't stand for such a tyranny. Rockefeller gazes at his younger brother with pity. It's true that he didn't expect such severe opposition. He didn't expect he'd need a policeman posted in front of his house, and yet now it's required for his family's safety. Nor did he imagine that he'd have to sleep with a pistol in his nightstand. But Rockefeller has a vision, one that small-minded people like Frank could never see. All Rockefeller can do is appeal to their simple interests. My plan with the railroads will succeed, and when it does, I again assure you that everyone in possession of Standard Oil stock will be very glad indeed. You never get it through your head, John. I was making my own way. Now I'm just in your pocket. You never gave any of us a choice. Rockefeller decides it's pointless to respond. Frank will never understand all the good that Rockefeller has accomplished, just in this short time. He's offered the refiner salvation from a slumping, unruly market. He's generously bought out businesses that would be bankrupt within the year. But Rockefeller knows there's another side to the story. Most people don't want to hear it. Many of Cleveland's refineries are junk. On the other hand, Standard Oil is an efficient, perfectly tuned machine. There's no way the other refineries can win this war, Rockefeller thinks. And they shouldn't even try. Because Rockefeller is going to continue his takeover, and no one will stop him. In the small town of Fox Lake, Illinois, Joe Glinowitz was a hometown hero and 30-year veteran of the local police department. On September 1st, 2015, just 1 month from retirement, he was found dead outside an abandoned cement plant, shot in the chest twice at close range. While the town and Joe's family mourned his passing, hundreds of police officers launched a manhunt to find his killer. After weeks of searching, the lead investigator discovered chilling secrets about Joe, the local police department, and the village of Fox Lake. These were secrets that, once uncovered, would put the town in the national spotlight and haunt them for years to come. Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a 3rd season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body Season 3, Fox Lake, on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app.
Hey, I'm Mike Corey, the host of Wandery's Against the Odds. In our next season, I'm telling the story of a group of Chilean miners who are trapped half a mile underground when their mine collapses. At first, rescuers fear that the men were crushed to death under tons of rubble. Then, when they make contact with the miners, they must undertake a rescue operation unlike any other in mining history, one that will be watched by over 1 billion people around the world. This is the incredible story of how mine experts, rescue specialists, politicians, and even NASA teamed up to reunite 33 men with their families on the surface. Follow Against the Odds on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you're listening right now.
It's March 25th, 1872. John D. Rockefeller hurries down a hallway in New York City's Grand Opera House. The walls of this building are embossed with gold, and attendants stand by wearing fine suits and coats. The atmosphere is meant to suggest dignity, respect, and calm. But right now, Rockefeller is full of a white-hot rage. Inside this opera house, a group of railroad executives are meeting with Standard Oil's rivals, and Rockefeller did not get an invitation. It appears that his budding empire could be under attack. Just recently, Rockefeller joined a scheme called the South Improvement Company. Railroad companies were tired of dealing with small-scale oil producers and refiners. It was inefficient and costly to ship products from so many different companies. Instead, the railroads wanted to ship products from a few major refiners, especially the largest refiner of them all, Standard Oil. And so Rockefeller worked out an arrangement with the head of a major railroad network. The railroads would give Standard significantly better rates on shipping. That would help drive away the competition and prop up Standard Oil. It was a big win for Rockefeller, but soon word got out. Oil producers were furious, as were competing refineries. Pennsylvania state legislature began to consider an investigation, and there were even signs that the federal government would get involved. Rockefeller knows that would be a disaster. So with the pressure high, it was obvious to Rockefeller that railroads were ready to cave and disband the operation. Why else would they agree to meet with the competition? Rockefeller turns a corner in the Opera House, still fuming. He's certain that he's done nothing wrong. Standard Oil is a bulk shipper. It deserves better rates. Other refineries don't deserve any kind of discounts, not when they deliver only a fraction of the business to the railroads. Still, this is a public relations disaster, and Rockefeller knows that he has to fix it. He has to get to the meeting and convince the railroads to stick with the original plan. Rockefeller reaches a meeting room with a closed door. Right then, he spots a group of journalists leaning against the wall. One of them spots Rockefeller and rushes forward. He says he's with the New York Times and demands a comment on the South Improvement Company. Rockefeller brushes him off, saying that he's late for a meeting. He has no comment. Rockefeller then pounds on the door. But the door doesn't open, so Rockefeller knocks again as the reporters continue to pepper him with questions. Finally, the door opens just a crack. A young man peers out. Rockefeller announces himself and demands to be let in. But the man says he's under instructions not to let Rockefeller enter. He then shuts the door in Rockefeller's face. Rockefeller stands at the door, his chest heaving, his head lowered. He tries to control his breathing. Behind him, the reporters continue shouting questions. Finally, he turns and gives a dignified nod. Then he moves past the reporters. They follow like a swarm of mosquitoes, but Rockefeller feels a growing calm. It's clear the South Improvement Company is as good as finished, killed in its cradle. That's a shame, thinks Rockefeller. He deserved those discounts. But the plan has already accomplished its larger purpose. It drove fear into the hearts of practically every refinery in Cleveland, and that drove the refineries right into Standard's arms. The refineries believed they couldn't compete, and so Rockefeller was able to buy them out. And with such a large operation, Rockefeller can now set kerosene prices however he pleases. No other refinery in America will be able to compete with Standard. Rockefeller reaches the large brass-handled doors of the building and pushes through onto 8th Avenue. The reporters don't follow. He looks up to the cloudless sky above the rooftops. Soon the country will celebrate the news that the South Improvement Company has been defeated, and then the press will go away. The government investigations will be abandoned, and the other oil companies will let their guards down. And that means soon, Rockefeller will continue to expand his empire. 3 years later, it's a sunny afternoon, and workmen stand on ladders as they apply a fresh coat of paint to the crown molding of the Titusville Opera House. John Archibald walks briskly past the building. He's in a hurry, but he decides to stop and watch the painters go about their work for a bit. He smiles and shakes his head. Titusville, Pennsylvania still likes to imagine that it's the sophisticated capital of the oil industry. But Archibald knows that's no longer the case. It's Cleveland now, home of Standard Oil. Archibald thinks back to the naive young man he was just 3 years ago. He stood on the stage of this very opera house and gave a fiery speech denouncing Standard Oil. In a way, Archibald is still proud of that speech. He meant every word of it. But Archibald knows there are some fights you just cannot win. Less than a year ago, John D. Rockefeller bought out the second largest refinery in Titusville. At the time, Archibald was an executive at that refinery. The move gave him a sobering lesson. It was obvious that Standard Oil was unstoppable, and soon his choice was clear. He could get a job with Standard and become a pariah among all his friends and colleagues, or he could be a loser, and Archibald doesn't like to lose. So Archibald continues walking, turns a corner, past the opera house, and straight into a giant man who bumps into him. Archibald nearly falls to the ground. He looks up and sees a man in clothes that are stained black from crude oil. The man stares with menacing eyes and mutters "traitor" under his breath. Archibald glances at the man, but he has no time for a fight. He has work to do now that he's on John D. Rockefeller's payroll. In just a few minutes, he'll attempt to buy another refinery and bring it into the Standard Oil family. Of course, no one will know that Standard Oil is making the purchase. Rockefeller created a front company called Acme Oil, and in the last month, Archibald has acquired 20 refineries for this secret offshoot of Standard. He's made Rockefeller a very happy man. Archibald continues walking down the streets of Titusville, grinning. If Rockefeller is happy, Archibald is going to be happy too. Rockefeller is accumulating a massive fortune, and if Archibald keeps adding to it, soon he'll also be a very rich man. It's a spring afternoon in 1876. Dark thunderclouds loom over Titusville, Pennsylvania. Ida Tarbill walks calmly outside her high school as her fellow seniors hurry toward their homes. She breathes in deeply, enjoying the smell of the approaching storm. The rain always washes the sour smell away from the town's air. Ida sees a friend from school and waves her over with a smile. The two walk together, chatting as they head home. When they reach Ida's house, Ida's father steps out onto the front porch. He gives Ida's friend a stern look, and quickly, Ida's friend excuses herself and hurries down the street. Ida joins her father on the porch. He narrows his eyes and watches as Ida's friend disappears around a corner. Then he turns back to Ida. You know, her father just went over to Standard. He's working for them now. At that, Ida feels her legs go weak. She knows her father has lost several friends to Standard Oil. He's always furious when he talks about them. He often points them out on the street. They're his enemies, he says. Ida respects her father's values, and so when she sees these men, she dislikes them too. But this is the first time the issue has affected one of her own friendships. She's not sure how to respond, or whose side to take. Really? She didn't tell me? I'm sorry about that. You don't apologize. You didn't do anything. It's Standard Oil. They're an octopus grabbing up everything. I don't even know how to fight it anymore. Raindrops begin to fall from the sky, pattering on the roof. Ida moves to stand beside her father. She decides to ask something she's never dared to say aloud. Do you ever think about going over to Standard? You know me better than that. I'll go back to plowing fields for a living before I become someone's hired man. I don't believe John D. Rockefeller should be the king of the oil regions. No man should be the lord of any other. That's why I'm never going to get married. No man will be the lord of me. Franklin smiles and nods at Ida. I respect that, I do. I guess we're alike, you and me. But I tell you, it's not always easy to go your own way. I know, but you managed to do it. I've also been lucky. The price of oil is holding. For now, we're all right. It's the future that I worry about. Standard could snap up all the refineries around here like it did in Cleveland. Then the entire industry is going to be in the hands of one man. Lord help us if that happens. Well, then you have to stop him. We have to stop him. Well, you just try. Seems every man's given up. Well, every man has, but I haven't. Franklin gazes at Ida and smiles. Look of pride beaming on his face. Stubborn, huh? Wonder where you get it. At that, he pats Ida on the shoulder and heads back into the house. Ida stares out at the bruised sky, her blood boiling with an intensity that surprises her. There's too much injustice in the world. Giant companies crushing the people of Titusville. The unfairness of what it means to be a woman like her. In a few years, the boys in her class can vote, but she can't. They can go to college and pursue careers, but she can't. No, for her, none of this is going to be simple. Ida knows that she has much to learn, and still so much she wants to do. She's still finding her place in the world. But if there's one thing that's clear about her future, it's that she's going to be a fighter and take on people like John D. Rockefeller. It's the fall of 1876 in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Ida Tarbell walks toward a red brick building with white columns and a bell tower. She holds a brand new textbook tight under one of her arms and a notebook in her opposite hand. She smiles, excited for this step into her future. Today, Tarbell is on the campus of Allegheny College for her first day of class. She enters the red brick building, an academic hall, and realizes something. This is the first time she's ever been in a building this old. She spent her entire life moving between boomtowns, whole areas propped up by the rise of the oil industry. But for the first time, she can feel that there's a world beyond the mad rush to the next gushing oil well, and she's hungry to know what her place in this world might be. Tarbell walks up the stairs to her first class. It's natural sciences, her favorite subject. She loves how with science, you get to puzzle through big questions, searching through evidence as you try to find an answer. Science is a way to find the truth, to investigate how things work. It's a rich and enjoyable challenge, and for weeks, Tarbell has been looking forward to this class. But when she steps into the classroom, she tenses up. Most of the desks are already filled with students, and every single one of them is a young man. Tarbell knew this would be the case, but somehow the excitement of the day made her forget. Allegheny is one of only a handful of colleges in the country to admit women. Ida knows there are only 4 other female students on the entire campus, and none of them are in her freshman class. As she makes her way to a desk, she can feel the young men staring at her. She feels self-conscious and very small. Tarbell takes a seat. The wooden chair is hard, the back uncomfortably straight. Tarbell can feel more eyes on her. For a moment, she has an impulse to run, to get away as quickly as possible. It doesn't help when the professor strides into the classroom and gives her what seems to be a dismissive smile. Suddenly, Tarbell feels woozy. But then she notices a gleaming microscope on the teacher's desk. Years ago, her father had bought her a microscope as a way to encourage her studies. But it was nothing like this one. She dreamed of being able to use such an instrument. And now she realizes she'll have the chance to live her dream, to ask big questions, to be challenged, and to challenge others. Tarbell feels an energy returning to her, like she's just drunk some magic tonic. The professor turns and begins to speak to the class, and Ida Tarbell leans forward in her chair, her eyes intense with focus. She's ready to pounce on the very first question he asks, and she's ready to prove that she can fight with her mind, and to challenge everything that's unfair. It's July 1879 in Albany, New York. Today, the state capitol building is buzzing with activity. Men in dark suits and bowler hats stream up the stone steps. They gossip with each other, trading notes. John Archbald stands on the street surveying the crowd. He takes a deep breath and then makes his way up the stairs. But as Archbald walks into the Capitol, he notices that many of the men have stopped talking. They're now watching him. Archbald straightens his coat and grins. He may be the main draw today at the Capitol, but he won't let the attention shake his confidence. It's been 7 years since the South Improvement Company was disbanded, and yet only now is the New York legislature investigating the matter. The state politicians are trying to understand the relationship between Standard Oil and the railroads. They want to figure out if there was any foul play. That's why Archbald is here today. He's going to testify in front of a committee and speak on the matter. As Archbald strides through the Capitol's hallways, he scoffs. This investigation won't turn up any dirt on Standard, he's sure of it. In fact, Archbald is looking forward to the hearing. Most men would shrink from this kind of public scrutiny, but not Archbald. He likes to fight, and he likes to win. Today's hearing should be a good opportunity to have some sporting fun, to cut down the politicians who believe themselves to be so important. Soon, Archbald walks into a large assembly room. He surveys the lawmakers who are seated behind an elevated bench, and Archbald grins. Legislators think they have all the power, but Archbald knows the truth. Standard Oil is much more powerful than this group of small men. Archbald takes a seat at a long table next to his lawyer. He gives his lawyer a wink, then turns to the panel of legislators. A. Barton Hepburn, the young committee chairman, looks down his thin nose at Archbald. He begins speaking in a strong, clear voice. The hearing will now come to order. Before us is John Archibald, a director of the Standard Oil Company. He's kind enough to join us in place of Standard Oil President John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller, as we are all aware, continues to evade our subpoenas.
My pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Archibald, what is your function as a director of the Standard Oil Company?
Well, my job is simple. I build a profitable company that pays dividends to its shareholders.
You say your job is simple, but the matter at hand is clearly the opposite. The South Improvement Company was a complex tangle of conspiracy, lies, and self-interest. So please, tell us what you know of Standard's relationship with the railroads, and do not mince your words.
Archibald smiles. He arrived today knowing that he'd face this kind of bluster. It hasn't shaken him, though. Sir, we require crude oil, and so we pay the railroads to ship it to us. We then refine the oil, and we pay the railroads again, this time to ship the kerosene we've made to consumers who demand it. That's the sum total of it. Oh, and we use the railroads when we have to come testify before committees.
I don't appreciate your arrogance, Mr. Archibald. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. Are you still receiving advantageous rebates from the railroads?
Archibald pauses. Of course, Standard has continued to get rebates from the railroads. The rebates may be smaller now, but they make all the difference. Standard remains a profitable company, and its competitors remain unprofitable. And Archibald knows there is currently no law that can change this arrangement. Still, Archibald would hate to inspire any new legislation. He looks to his lawyer, who shakes his head. Archibald responds, I refuse to answer on advice of counsel.
Then will you respond to an opinion of mine, Mr. Archibald? We can't know the extent of your current relationship with the railroads, but your past actions and continuing arrogance make something painfully obvious. You're abusing a public service for private ends, and that hurts our democracy. What do you say to this charge?
Archibald looks again to his lawyer, then responds, I refuse to answer on advice of counsel.
It appears that John Archibald has no interest in the public good. Let the record show it. Now, Mr. Archibald, under oath, are you aware of the Acme Oil Company? You seem to have represented that firm at one time.
Archibald cocks his head. He didn't expect the committee to uncover anything about Acme. It was the front company he used to secretly purchase refineries for Standard. It allows Standard to grow into the unstoppable force that it is today, controlling 90% of the country's ability to refine oil. But Archibald doesn't hesitate as he leans forward to answer.
Chairman Hepburn, you're mistaken. I have no idea what you're talking about. I work for Standard Oil. Standard has no connection with Acme.
Hepburn's eyes narrow.
We'll look more deeply into this matter, Mr. Archibald. Tomorrow, you will continue testifying in the morning.
You're mistaken about that as well, Mr. Chairman. It's impossible for me to meet with you again. This is the end of my testimony. Archibald doesn't wait for a reply. He rises, straightens his coat, and begins walking toward the exit. As he walks past a row of onlookers, he can't help but smirk. New York's politicians had 7 years to build a case against Standard Oil, and yet they remain as harmless as a fly. Archibald may have spoken out against Standard Oil years ago, but today he's never been so glad to be on the winning side of the oil industry. Standard will continue to outmaneuver its opponents. For months and for years, Archibald is certain of it. Nothing will stop its rise. The only question now is, how big can Standard Oil grow? Next on American Scandal, John D. Rockefeller struggles to maintain control over the sprawling Standard Oil empire, and Ida Tarbell goes abroad to start a career in journalism that was called back home when disaster strikes. From Wondery, this is episode 2 of the Breakup of Big Oil for American Scandal. If you like our show, please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. And be sure to tell your friends. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Wondery app, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free. You'll also find some links and offers from our sponsors in the episode notes. Supporting them helps us keep offering our shows for free. Another way you can support the show is by filling out a small survey at Wondery.com/survey to tell us what topics we might cover next. You can also find us and me on Twitter. Search for hashtag American Scandal or follow me at Lindsay A. Graham. And be sure to listen to my other podcasts too, American History Tellers and American Elections Wicked Game. A quick note about our reenactments. In most cases, we can't know exactly what was said, but all our dramatizations are based on historical research. If you'd like to learn more about the breakup of Big Oil, we recommend the memoir All in the Day's Work by Ida M. Tarbell. American Scandal is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsay Graham, for Airship. Audio editing by Molly Bach. Sound design by Derek Barons. This episode is written by Michael Kenyon Meyer, edited by Christina Malsberger, produced by Gabe Riven. Executive producers are Stephanie Jens, Jenny Lauer Beckman, and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.